Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching The Big Picture with me, Frank Pereira. A day after US President Donald Trump called Prime Minister Narendra Modi to greet him on India's Independence Day, the US designated Pakistan-based Hizbul Mujahideen responsible for terrorist attacks in Jammu and Kashmir for the last 3 decades as a foreign terrorist organization. The labeling of Hizbul as an FTO means that the outfit will face financial sanctions. The Trump administration's previous decision to designate Hizbul chief Syed Salahuddin a global terrorist came just ahead of Modi's meeting with the US President in Washington in June. The announcement is also read as a sign of US-India proximity on strategic issues at a time when India is locked in a tense face-off with China. The action against Hizbul also indicates that the US does not support Beijing's efforts to protect terror groups sustained by Pakistan against international sanctions. On this edition of The Big Picture, we will analyze the implications of the Hizbul ban. Joining me on the program today are T.C.A.Rangachari, former diplomat, Major General S.B. Asthana, retired defense expert, Professor S.D. Muni, foreign affairs expert, and Suhasini Haidar, diplomatic editor, The Hindu. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. Ambassador, I'd like to begin with you. What do you think of the US administration's move to label Hizbul Mujahideen as a global terrorist organization?
Well, if you see it in the context of trying to put the squeeze on financing of terrorism, then this is something which was long overdue. Every country in the United Nations has spoken about being opposed to terrorism, being united with the rest of the international community in taking such steps as are necessary to stop terrorist activities anywhere in the world, and to all the means and methodologies, including financing, to put a stop to that. So they are in fact committed in terms of their own word that they would take these steps. Specifically, the United States has an executive order under which this decision has been taken, which means that as far as the United States jurisdiction extends, then whatever properties or finances or other assets that any organization or individual so designated will have can be, in fact, will be subject to confiscation or other restrictions by the United States. And also any United States national who has any dealings of that kind with these kinds of organizations or individuals, the executive order bars them from doing so. Now, if I saw in the earlier commentary this reference to how this is a symbol of a strategic partnership, I would hope in India that we would look at it more in the context of the commitments made by the individual countries and following through on them, rather than seeing it as a favor done, because this should be the action that every country should take towards every terrorist organization.
Very well analyzed. You know, Professor S.D. Muni, as far as the Indian perspective is concerned, what does it really mean? Is it going to dent the Hizbul Mujahideen in any way?
See, I think it was coming because you remember 50 days back, they designated Salahuddin as the international terrorist. Now, if you designate the leader of an organization as an international terrorist, you can't leave the organization untouched. More than that, Hizbul has been very openly coming up with their links with Al-Qaeda on the one hand and the Islamic State on the other, which gives it an international dimension. Besides the Pakistani support, which is there behind it, and US was, I mean, much earlier was quite hesitant to recognize a terrorist group which affects only a region, particularly South Asia, as an international terrorist group, because they did not go beyond Al-Qaeda or at the most Islamic State. Gradually, there is a strategic distancing between them and Pakistan. There is no denying the fact. And I would agree with you that there is a strategic greater synergy between US and India on various issues. This is a particular moment when things are moving further.
You use the words synergy. Is partnership too strong a word to use at this point in time?
Well, I don't think so, because there are so many words which have been used, particularly by the US vis-a-vis India. you know, the defining relationship. Where do you go beyond that? If it is a defining relationship of the century, you call it by any name. Therefore, but in terms of practice, in terms of ground reality, things have been moving in a manner that greater understanding on various issues are developing between the two countries. And therefore, it is good that the US has now shed off its earlier hesitation and also recognize that these are the groups which are actually creating. And why not? I mean, 1.6 billion South Asian subcontinent, and if the terrorists are operating here, it is almost 1/6 of the universe.
Sure.
Therefore, you have to recognize them in terms of their international import.
Indeed. You know, General, from an Indian point of view, from an Indian perspective, it's more important what really the Hizbul Mujahideen does in the valley. Do you believe that this move is going to curtail or clip their wings and ensure that things like recruitment and other matters as far as the valley are concerned, is all of that going to be curtailed?
Okay. Firstly, I would welcome this move of United States. And as far as the valley is concerned, one very good thing which has happened is that this has broken the myth that this was homegrown law and order problem, which US had been saying for some time. Now, a global narrative is that it is not a homegrown problem. It is not the case of Azadi. If it was the case of Azadi, Hizbul Mujahideen chief who lost elections here and who contested elections here would not have contested it if he was talking of Azadi. But he did so. None of his children has joined. His entire family is here. Similarly, if you see the per capita income of Valley, it is better than a large number of states of India. So, where is the case of Azadi? So, this was not the case of Azadi. Here was a man, as far as I am concerned, he was a defeated politician. He made statements to the effect that I will ensure that the peace does not prevail in Valley. Now, from Mr. Nobody, after he lost election, he became Mr. Somebody. And the reason was that he entered a terror industry. Now, terror industry is a very lucrative industry. There was a fair amount of money. There are fair amount of privileges which he is enjoying in Pakistan, and ISI and Pakistan, they were too willing to help him out. Now, as far as the operations in Valley is concerned, we will have to continue as per the synergized operations which are going on now. The government, the NIA, which is controlling the terror funding, the security forces, everybody seems to be on the same page. Even the police and the people seem to be coming up with action intelligence. And therefore, the kind of results which you see are very encouraging. And I will again, one more thing which I want to touch upon before I finish. You see, out of, in this year, 130 approximately militants have been killed, out of which only 30 are Kashmiri youth. So that means it is a foreign hand which is absolutely visible.
Sure. Sure.
Now, out of these 30 also, if you ask, if you go into everybody's detail, you will find that these guys are the ones who don't want to work. We have been meeting their parents to say as to why don't you stop these guys?
Sure.
The parents say, he gets good money, he gets all privileges, he can do whatever he wants with a whole lot of families which are around, and nobody will speak a word, nobody will complain. That's the way they go about it. And therefore, he tells me, Papa, why should I work?
Sure.
So that is the case. It's not the question of not finding work and things like that.
Right. Let me bring in Suhasini Haidar into the debate as well. You know, Suhasini, this is not the first time that the Americans have designated the Pakistani terror group as a global terrorist organization. It has happened with various organizations in the past as well. What has been the success story, or what has been what has happened to all of that?
Well, certainly, I think while the designation of Hizbul Mujahideen as a foreign terrorist group and of Syed Salahuddin as a global terrorist is something that India has been wanting for a long time. Let's remember, though, that the Hizbul Mujahideen was set up in 1989. So this is not something that we can really sort of jump for joy with, but we can say, well, it is late, but at least the US has done it now. Secondly, we have to remember that the US is the only country that maintains these lists of foreign terrorist organizations. For most of the world, it is enough that some group is designated by the United Nations Security Council, and most nations are supposed to adhere to that. The third thing is, as you had asked, is what is the track record of the kind of action against these groups? I have to say that the other two groups that attack India, that are based in Pakistan, that have also been foreign terrorist organizations, have also been UNSC designated organizations, are really the Lashkar-e-Toiba and the Jaish-e-Mohammed. While we see absolutely, I mean, we see very few strictures on either of those organizations. When it comes to holding rallies, both Hafiz Saeed as well as Masood Azhar are able to travel free around Pakistan, hold rallies, massive rallies, where a lot of expenses undertaken. We saw one of the main leaders of the Lashkar-e-Toiba, Zakir Rahman Lakhvi, get bail in the 26/11 Mumbai terror attack case. He received bail, which was a contravention of the UNSC orders. But even so, very little has been done against him. And the third thing, now, and I'm not for a moment saying this should be the strategy. I'm just saying that if the US is trying to make the point that it sees the groups that attack India, that are based in that area, on the same level as it sees other groups in that area, then how is it that we've never seen a targeting of the Lashkar-e-Toiba, of the Jaish-e-Mohammed, of Hizbul Mujahideen directly?
Sure.
We have seen the Taliban targeted directly. We have seen the TTP targeted directly, all on the other frontier of Pakistan. But we have never seen the US really take direct action. So I would say that it's well done, but really only a step in the direction that India would like to see.
Okay, fair enough. Ambassador Rangachari, is that what's going to happen? I mean, just like Jaish-e-Mohammed and Lashkar-e-Toiba, the name of Haqqani network, the name of Hizbul Mujahideen is going to change really. Syed Salahuddin is probably going to be in the house arrest for a few days, and it's going to be back to square one.
I'm not sure that it is that easy for the Hizbul Mujahideen to evolve or metamorphosize itself into another organization with a different name. It is a brand. And as I suppose in most matters, when you have established a brand, then to change that brand and develop into another is not that easy. Jamaat-ud-Dawa, when there were restrictions imposed, at that time it converted itself into other organizations. But all of these are part of the United Jihad Council, of which Salahuddin was the chairman,
yes,
president. Now, therefore, everybody knows what is what. Just because you change a name, it doesn't mean that you convey to the people that somehow this is a totally different outfit. The person has changed or the person is different. Everybody is able to see through this kind of a game now. After all, it's been going on for a long enough time. Ultimately, the test will be what is the view that Pakistan takes. If you go back to 2004, when Mr. Vajpayee, as Prime Minister, had visited Pakistan, General Musharraf had given a commitment that Pakistan or any territory under the control of Pakistan, and that phrase was specifically coined in order to cover POK, would not be allowed to operate this terrorist activity, etc., against any third country. Now, since then, we have seen, this is what now, 13 years down the line, we really haven't seen any serious effort on the part of Pakistan, either the civilian government or the armed forces, to target these organizations in quite the same way in which they have targeted the organizations operating on the borders with Afghanistan. So, till such time as Pakistan itself changes course and stops using terrorism and terrorist organizations as a part of its state policy, it's going to be very difficult for any kind of external sanctions to bring about the same level of pressure. And perhaps, hopefully in the short term, be able to eliminate these organizations.
Sure. Professor Muni, what will Pakistan really do? Because see, we've seen the Americans try desperately on the western frontier, just like Suhasini mentioned, as far as the Haqqanis and the Taliban are concerned, the military pressure, the dangling of the economic carrot, and all of that has been tried, but Pakistan has not really yielded.
No, Pakistan will not yield easily. It is a very well planned and organized strategy to use these groups against the targets which the Pakistanis have already identified, both in Afghanistan and on the Kashmir front in India. And in Afghanistan, they have targeted more American soldiers than anybody else. And this is what the Americans have realized. Look, the Americans have been trying to stop their financial assistance by saying, why don't you curb Haqqani group? And Haqqani group nowhere is being curbed. I mean, yes, as Suhasini said, they are targeting some of these groups, but there is always a very fine distinction as to who has to be targeted, who has not to be targeted. They are targeting more of the TTP people than Haqqani group, or than those who are linked to their sympathizers in Al-Qaeda and others, or Taliban and others. So there is a method in the madness, and I think we all understand that method. Almost everybody understands this method. And this is where they are now, with the increasing American pressure, my feeling is that they are coordinating with the Chinese. I hope not that even Russians jump into this in order to cushion off that pressure. And that's where you see that on other issue, Chinese have put their foot down. They are not going to do. And this is not because only Chinese want to look at the technicalities. This is primarily because Pakistan doesn't want some of these groups and individuals to be punished and singled out.
Sure.
Now, this is where the whole issue of terrorism in the region is linked to the, I would say, mobile and changing strategic equations in this part of the world. And that's where I think you put this subject very well into the big picture, that it is not simply a local issue. It is an issue, so far as these other powers are concerned, linked to what they want to see in this part of the world, how they want to shape their equations with some of these key countries, and what their ultimate objectives are in the short run, because
right.
nobody is thinking of 10 years or 12, certainly not the Americans.
Indeed, indeed. General, is it then a difficult balancing act that India has to strike at this point in time? Because as India is seen growing closer towards the United States, we are probably distancing ourselves from Russia.
I won't, in fact, totally agree with you in that manner. Because if you recall, Prime Minister Modi first went to Russia before he went to US. So as far as our partnership with Russia or relations with Russia are concerned, and if you compare, it is not one of the two, it is both. And India has been very famous.
But on the global stage, when Russia is being sidelined time and again, they are seen to be going closer to China.
That's a marriage of convenience. It's not that the Russian policies can be dictated by Xi Jinping and vice versa. The problem is that Russia needs money, so he has to get closer to China. So it's a marriage of convenience. It's not that it's a very comfortable arrangement. Because when he talks of OBOR and when the Russians' infrastructure, which he has got in the Central Asia, and those interests challenge and clash with each other, they have to make some adjustments. So it's not that, and as far as India is concerned, you see, even when there were two groups, two clear-cut groups, we had an independent foreign policy, we were non-aligned. Even today, we can confidently say that we do have an independent foreign policy. It's a question of the perceptions of people who are trying to put in this manner that India is getting very close to USA. Tomorrow, if there is an issue where our national interest says that we have to stand up to USA in a particular policy, I am sure India will do that, because India is a country which has stood for it. So that's the first part of your question. The second part is that if you see the terror part, I mean, I would like to add on to my panelists, in the terror industry, the fuel is money. And if this money gets curbed in some manner, then it does affect the terror industry.
Sure.
And this issue of changing names, coming up with a social organization, and then doing business as usual has been done 100 times. So many organizations have done it. But they are also in this terror industry, the alliances are different. Now, you take the case of Pakistan. In Pakistan, there are 3 different groups. One is pitched against India, one is pitched against Afghanistan, one is the group which is hitting Pakistan itself. So a terrorist is a monster.
Sure.
Even you take the case of today, Salahuddin, the Hizbul Mujahideen chief. This guy had made a statement to say that Pakistan is helping me to fight against India.
Right.
And he also says the day Pakistan stops helping me, I will fight in Pakistan. He didn't say against Pakistan, but he said I will fight in Pakistan.
Sure.
Which indirectly says everything.
Right. Right.
So,
Suhasini, then can we call it a political and a strategic victory really as for New Delhi?
I certainly think it is the US trying to make a political reach out by letting India know that all of these groups that are of concern to India, particularly right now, where the violence in Kashmir is on the rise and, there is a real worry about infiltration. I think that's really the nature of the American decision. As far as the economic sanctions part of it is concerned, we'll really have to see. The fact is that anyone who gets onto these lists will lose, access to funding. But over the past, few decades, we've seen that this kind of international funding is not routed through America, for example, and perhaps will not affect the groups as much as we hope they will. What it does do is it gives a political stamp to what India has been saying for a while, and that's certainly welcome.
Okay, I've got about 5 minutes left on the program, so I'm going to get quick closing comments from all my guests, starting with you, Ambassador. Is it a victory for India or Pakistan, or is it too strong a word to state at the moment?
I look forward to the day when we wouldn't have to debate an issue like this, and we wouldn't look upon this as a victory or a defeat, because I'm looking forward to the day when Pakistan would cease to support terrorist organizations, use terrorism as an instrument of state policy, and look for better relations with India.
Sure, better relations with India. I hope that day comes sooner rather than later. And
Indeed.
I like your positive note at this point in time. But, Professor, going forward, what do you see really happening as far as these terror organizations, these terror groups are concerned?
Well, I don't think, I again agree with Suhasini, no major change we should expect, because so long as the Pakistan policy and strategy does not radically change in this respect, these groups would continue to operate from the Pakistani soil. So far as funding is concerned, yes, they would be restrained a little bit here and there, but then they will change their name. Already, I think there are factions within Hizbul which are changing their names. And earlier we saw Jamaatul Dawa, for instance, change the name, started collecting money from local sources, from Arabic world, various other sources. So they can continue to operate with, and if the Pakistani state is willing to fund them, they should not have any dearth of money so far as operational tactics are concerned. Therefore, financing is a restraint, welcome restraint. We wanted it, it has come up, very good. But whether it decisively would alter the dynamics of terrorism will continue to be a matter of debate.
Indeed.
I'm not quite convinced that it is going to make overnight a change in their strategy and their thrust.
How do we get to the root of the problem then, General?
As far as getting to the root of the problem is concerned, if you are looking the answer of the problem in Pakistan, I don't think we will be able to get to the root of the problem.
I don't think we can get that answer. But from an Indian perspective, what is it that
as far as we are concerned, our Kashmir part is concerned, I think we are on that way. Because the kind of synergy, you see the government, the legal system, 35A I am referring to, the security forces, and everybody coming on the same page and terror funding being targeted, separatists being targeted, everything happening together is a positive note for me as far as we are concerned and our part of Kashmir is concerned.
Sure. Yes, Professor, you want to
I
say?
simply wanted to add a sentence that the advantage which accrues to a country like India from this change is that if you now hit Salahuddin or his associates, nobody would say that this is a human right violation.
Okay, fair enough. You know, Suhasini, please close the show for us with your concluding remarks.
I think we must be grateful that the US has woken up to the danger of the Hizbul Mujahideen. What we must watch much more closely, though, is what is going to be the US's AFPAC policy. It's more than a few months delayed so far. But I think what their new AFPAC policy, or what they are calling a South Asian policy, will determine is the future of all of this. Because if the US decides to put more weight into Afghanistan, into the fight against terror over there, then perhaps we will see different results. If, in fact, the US is planning to put maybe a few thousand more soldiers in or pull out entirely from Afghanistan, then India has to brace for that. And I think Professor Muni also spoke about the idea that there is already an arc coming up with Russia, with China, with Iran, perhaps with Pakistan, that we must also factor in to our future planning. So I think while the US decision to designate Hizbul Mujahideen must be welcomed, the larger fight has many more parts to it.
Okay, the larger fight has many more parts to it. We'll have to see how those parts play out in the days to come. But I'd like to thank all my guests for joining me on the big picture today. T.C.A.Rangachari, SB Asthana, ST Muni and Suhasini Haidar, thank you so much for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. That's all the time we have today. See you again next time.